Titan attacking your target. Warning, enemy pilot attacking. Salvo core ready.
The Atlas Titans are the most popular and adaptive of the three chassis. They offer a great blend of speed and armor, with multi-purpose weapons and abilities. For Titanfall 3, I think it's safe to say that the Atlas class Titans need to remain as a solid and reliable choice for players to fall back on. So with that being said, it's time to discuss my redesigns for Ion, Tone, and Monarch. I fully understand that the Atlas Titans from Titanfall 2 may not make their way into Titanfall 3, but if they do, here's how I like to see them implemented. Keep in mind that these are just my opinions, and I expect that many of you will not like my suggestions since ultimately I'm messing around with the functionality of your favorite Titans. But as someone who doesn't really main one Titan in particular, I have used every Titan extensively and play fairly well with all of them. Sure, I may not have a Generation 70 Ronin, but I'm at least a Generation 20 with every Titan in the game. Now, this doesn't mean that I know everything about every Titan, but I do have a lot of experience in the game in regards to how each Titan functions and stacks up against each other. If you haven't already watched my video discussing changes to Titan functionality, I highly recommend that you watch it first, since my redesigns are based on the mechanics I established in that video. But for those who want a quick overview, in my vision of Titanfall 3, each Titan could choose a few different weapons of similar type and role, equip a weapon attachment, and choose one of 3 different variants for each of their abilities. I'm going to go through each Titan one by one and discuss weapon options, weapon attachments, defensive abilities, utility abilities, offensive abilities, core functionality, and Titan-specific kits. Now, I can't stress this next part enough. It's very important to keep in mind that by default, many of these weapons and abilities may need to be less effective compared to their Titanfall 2 counterparts in order to balance out the fact that they'll have attachments or variants. However, for the most part, I'm not going to talk about this since I don't feel confident talking about general damage nerfs without actually having played the game. I'm also not going to force ideas for the sake of completion, since I find that these ideas are rarely good ones. I'd rather leave some parts blank and hear your guys' opinions rather than shoehorn my own in. So with all of that out of the way, let's start with Ion. Ion is a fantastic middle-of-the-road Titan that is easily the best at adapting and surviving, making it a solid choice for new players and Titanfall veterans alike. In my opinion, adaptability and survivability are the 2 traits that define Ion's playstyle, with weapons that can fulfill many roles, a chassis that offers both durability and speed, and easily the best defensive ability in the game. If Ion comes back in Titanfall 3, I want to see her playstyle remain intact since she's a very well-rounded Titan. Let's start with her ability set. I think Vortex Shield, Laser Tripwire, and Laser Shot are great abilities that don't need to be replaced. However, I would like to see a few changes. Vortex Shield is probably the best defensive ability in the game for absorbing damage, not to mention the added threat of returning projectiles. However, one problem I have with Vortex Shield is how much it counters Legion, and to a lesser extent Monarch. I personally really dislike how returning bullets is treated as a hit scan weapon. Returning Tone's rockets can be extremely effective, but requires players to have precise timing and good aim. I wish that the same could be said about bullets, so for Titanfall 3, I think that everything Ion returns should be treated as a projectile rather than hit scan to make the Ion Legion matchup a bit more skill based. As for Vortex Shield variants, I think I mentioned these last video, so I'll just go over them quickly. Players can choose between Efficient Shield, a Vortex Shield that reduces return projectile damage but consumes less energy, Amplified Shield, a vortex shield that increases return projectile damage and travel speed, but consumes more energy, and Turbo Shield, a vortex shield that increases movement speed and dash regeneration rate while active. Moving on to Laser Tripwire, I feel that it's a great utility ability that doesn't see too much use or is commonly used poorly. Don't get me wrong, I think that some players can use it very effectively, but those players are few and far between. For the most part, I don't see Laser Tripwire being used at all, and I think that needs to be addressed. The first change I would make would be for Laser Tripwire to attach to surfaces and emit a bright laser, rather than being placed on the ground. To help illustrate this idea, take a look at this clip of the Trip Mine grenade in Destiny 2. This would allow players to place tripwires in a variety of locations, rather than being limited to the floor. In addition to this, the tripwire base would be much smaller. While the laser would still be very noticeable, destroying it would require more aim and precision. In Titanfall 2, Laser Tripwire is so large that destroying it doesn't require much effort, making it less effective than it should be. As for Laser Tripwire variants, players could choose between Arc Tripwire, Zero Point Tripwire, or Reinforced Tripwire. Arc Tripwire would briefly stun enemy titans in addition to dealing damage, Zero Point Tripwire would cost less energy to use, and Reinforced Tripwire could take significantly more damage before being destroyed. As for Laser Shot, this is a fairly well-rounded ability that I don't think should see any major changes. For Laser Shot variants, players could choose between Precision Laser, Drain Laser, or Quick Laser. Precision Laser would deal more critical hit damage, but would deal less non-critical hit damage. Precision Laser would also have a brief charge-up time so that other players could see it coming. Drain Laser is a more unique variant that would deal no damage or use any energy. Instead, Drain Laser would be on a regular cooldown. When an enemy Titan is hit with Drain Laser, their abilities would stop recharging for a few seconds and Ion would receive a boost of energy. Critical hits with Drain Laser would grant Ion even more bonus energy. However, Drain Laser would not prevent already available abilities from being used and would deal no damage to pilots or minions. Against another Ion, Drain Laser would simply steal the other Ion's energy. The last Laser Shot variant would be Quick Laser. Quick Laser deals less damage but consumes less energy and can be fired in a near instant with a quick tap of the button. Quick Laser could also be fired twice in a row with some energy left over. Moving on to weapons and attachments, I think that Splitter Rifle should return as well as seeing a new weapon entirely, the Trace Rifle. Splitter Rifle would act the same way as it does in Titanfall 2, where you can split the shot for extra damage at the cost of your energy reserves. For weapon attachments, players could choose between extra ammo, speed reload, or entangled energy. The Trace Rifle, on the other hand, would function entirely differently. This weapon would fire a solid laser beam at its target. Now this beam wouldn't necessarily be hit scan and would lag slightly behind where you were aiming, similar to a high pressure water hose. To hit pilots or titans' weak points with this weapon, you would need to anticipate their movement and aim ahead. Unlike the Splitter Rifle, the Trace Rifle wouldn't have a traditional magazine. Instead, it would have an overheat system similar to the L-Star. The longer you fire, the more heat the weapon builds up, eventually needing to vent. However, the longer the Trace Rifle fires, the more damage it deals, but the more heat it builds up. When the weapon reaches max heat, it will also reach max damage. When this happens, the player can stop firing and press the reload button to start the venting process. However, if the player keeps holding the trigger, the Trace Rifle will continue to fire at its maximum damage by bleeding your energy reserves. Firing while venting would interrupt the venting process and cause the weapon to start firing again. If the Trace Rifle is at maximum heat and you run out of energy, this will trigger the weapon to overheat like the L-Star, requiring you to go through a long reload animation where you swap out the power source. As for weapon attachments, players could choose between Heatsink, Thermal Vent, and Entangled Energy. Heatsink would allow the weapon to be fired longer before reaching maximum heat, and Thermal Vent would decrease the time it takes the weapon to vent, as well as speeding up the reload animation of the overheat. I think this is a pretty interesting idea since it utilizes Ion's energy in a different way to the Splitter Rifle. I also feel that the Trace Rifle would open Ion up for some really interesting weapon-based builds. However, the Splitter Rifle is a much simpler weapon for players to use that doesn't come with some of the drawbacks of the Trace Rifle, so I feel that it should remain in the game. For Ion's core ability, as I stated last video, I'm not a big fan of damage-based cores. However, I'm not actually against Laser Core making a return. There are two problems I have with how Laser Core works right now. The first is that as a damage-based core, it reduces an entire Titan fight to the press of a single button. And the second is that Ion is left so exposed upon activation, often making it a suicide core which takes away from her survivable nature. To get around these problems, I'll propose a few changes. The first would be to simply reduce the amount of damage that Laser Core deals. However, instead of needing to fully charge her core, Ion could activate Laser Core at any time and turn it off mid-use. You need to have at least 30% of your core meter filled before you could use it, and it would still have a brief charge-up period before firing. These changes would allow Ion to incorporate Laser Core more often into fights, but not in a way that just deletes an enemy Titan. I think that Laser Core is somewhat needed for Ion since she doesn't deal as much damage as many of the other Titans, and Laser Core somewhat makes up for that. I'm not completely sure if this would make Laser Core completely over or underpowered, but I think if it's done right, it could be a great change to the core. Still, I fully acknowledge that this could be a risky idea, and I'm not 100% confident that it would work well. Lastly, we have Ion's Titan kits. Since many of the existing kits have been absorbed by ability variants and weapon attachments, I had to come up with a few new ideas. The only returning kit is Grand Cannon, which makes using Laser Core consume your core meter at a slower rate. The next kit option would be Energy Efficiency. This is a fairly straightforward kit that increases the rate at which Ion regenerates energy. To what degree, I'm not sure. That's something that would need to be tested and balanced. Next would be the Laser Focus kit. This would make critical hits with your weapon and laser shot generate more core energy. And the fourth and final kit would be Energized Plating. This would be Ion's chassis related kit, and would cause Ion to regenerate energy twice as fast when in a doom state. Additionally, like all chassis related kits, it would also reduce how long Ion is affected by stun effects like Arc Grenade. With how the doom state works in Titanfall 2, this kit would probably be completely overpowered, and with how doom state works in Titanfall 1, this kit would probably be completely underpowered. But if Titanfall 3 used my idea for the doom state where your health depletes at a very slow rate, I think this could work really well. If there's anything that I feel is missing from Ion's customization selection, it would probably be a fourth weapon attachment. If you guys have any ideas, please let me know down in the comments. Next up is Tone. Tone was once the most despised Titan in the game, but aside from Salvo Core, I think that Tone is a fairly well balanced Titan now. In my opinion, Tone's main roles are defense and map control, and I think her ability set works really well for this. However, one of Tone's biggest weaknesses is how easy she is to predict. If you can count to 3, you can counter Tone. So many of my changes and additions will focus on giving Tone more options to acquire locks. Now this might make Tone overpowered in the right hands, and nobody wants to return to the way she was at launch. To counteract this, I think Tone should need to acquire 5 marks to lock instead of 3. Now that may seem like a massive nerf, but with some of the changes and additions to Tone's weapons and abilities, it really isn't. I also think that Tone's rocket salvo damage should be slightly decreased, and weapon damage slightly increased. In Titanfall 2, the 40mm cannon doesn't really contribute all that much to destroying an enemy Titan, leaving most of the work up to rocket salvo. But with that out of the way, let's discuss Tone's abilities, starting with Particle Wall. I think this ability is great and suits Tone's role very well. For variants, players could choose between Reinforced Wall, A-Wall, or Arc Wall. These are all fairly basic. Reinforced Wall makes the wall stronger and lasts longer. A-Wall amps weapon shots that pass through by 10%, but not abilities, and Arc Wall deals damage and stuns enemies that attempt to walk through it. Next is Sonar Pulse. This is where things get interesting. Sonar Pulse would work exactly the same way in concept, but the variants would make it play out differently. Players could choose between Echo Pulse, Double Pulse, and Marking Pulse. Upon use, Echo Pulse would latch onto a surface. Initially, it wouldn't acquire any marks, but would begin to pulse shortly after use, and would pulse 3 times before wearing off. However, during this time, enemy players could find and destroy it. Double Pulse gives players a second charge of Sonar Pulse, but the pulse's size would be significantly reduced. Marking Pulse, on the other hand, wouldn't acquire any locks at all. Instead, Marking Pulse would stay on the ground for a short duration, and any enemies in its radius would be marked twice when shot with Tone's primary weapon. Enemies would be able to see the radius of the pulse, allowing them to pinpoint its location and get away from its effect. In any case, Marking Pulse would either draw attention from players or force them to move. Like Echo Pulse, players could find and destroy it to disable its effect. Moving on to Rocket Salvo, I think this ability should stay the same, other than requiring 5 marks instead of 3. As for variants, players could choose between Javelin Rockets, Rocket Barrage, and Rapid Rockets. Javelin Rockets would cause the rocket salvo to travel in a straight line for a brief period before moving towards its intended target. This would allow players to arc the rockets in unique ways to get around obstacles and defensive abilities. Rocket Barrage would simply increase the amount of rockets that are fired, but cause them to travel slower. And lastly, Rapid Rockets would travel much faster and track more aggressively, leaving less time for enemies to react. Moving on to weapons and attachments, I personally really like the design of the 40mm cannon. The only changes I would make to its functionality would be to decrease its projectile size and increase its travel speed. But I don't feel like these are absolutely essential changes, and I would be fine with it coming back in its current state. For weapon attachments, players could choose between extra ammo, speed reload, burst loader, or tracker rounds. Extra ammo and speed reload are fairly obvious, increasing magazine size by an additional 4 rounds and increasing reload speed respectively. Burst Loader would function identically to the kit in Titanfall 2, allowing players to load 3 rounds while zooming in and fire them in one burst. However, this attachment would also massively increase the recoil, making shots harder to hit. Similarly, tracker rounds would also function identically to its Titanfall 2 kit, where critical hits would apply 2 locks. In addition to the 40mm cannon, players could also choose the rotary cannon. The rotary cannon would have 3 sets of twin barrels in a triangle formation. When fired, the rotary cannon would fire 2 shots in rapid succession, then rotate to the next 2 barrels.
Salvo core activated.
Dominating that pilot.
The rounds themselves would be larger, dealing more damage and having a larger splash radius, but would travel significantly slower. Precise timing and aim would be important to ensure that both shots land on target. If only one shot hits the target, the rotary cannon would have a significantly slower lock time than the 40mm cannon. However, if players could consistently land both shots, the rotary cannon would have a faster lock time. Against pilots, the 40mm would be much better at hitting rooftops and goosing, while the rotary cannon would be better at utilizing splash damage in buildings and around corners. For attachments, players could select extra ammo, speed reload, sync shot, or tracker rounds. Extra ammo, speed reload, and tracker rounds would work the exact same way as the 40mm cannon, while sync shot would cause both barrels to fire at the same time, eliminating the delay and increasing the fire rate, but decreasing the accuracy and making the shots harder to hit. Next is Tone's core ability. Salvo core is my least favorite core ability in the game, given that it deals tremendous damage, can't really be avoided, and can be activated from behind the safety of a particle wall. While this ability looks cool and is really fun to use, I feel it takes more away from the game than it adds. To replace it, I think a more utility-based pulse core would be better. Upon activation, Tone's chassis would emit 5 long-range pulses over a short duration that highlight the entire map for both you and your team. Any Titans, Reapers, or Sentries that are relatively nearby would receive marks, allowing Tone to lock very quickly. Pulse Core would also give your entire team full map awareness while activated, similar to the pre-nerf map hack. However, unlike map hack, players would need to use a specific Titan and build the core before they could use it. For these reasons, I don't think that the Pulse Core would feel nearly as cheap or overpowered as the pre-nerf map hack did, since players need to survive long enough in their Titan to earn it. While it wouldn't look nearly as cool as Salvo Core, I think the team utility that this core would provide more than makes up for it. Ultimately, I feel that this core fits a lot better into Tone's intended role of map control rather than just nuking an enemy Titan into oblivion. And lastly, we have Tone's Titan-specific kits. Each of Tone's new kits would give players a different way of acquiring target locks. However, how each of these kits function is radically different from each other. The Enhanced Pulse Core kit would cause Pulse Core to emit 7 pulses rather than 5. These pulses would also acquire locks from a much further distance, and the 7 pulses would cause Pulse Core to last longer, giving your team map visibility for a longer duration. Reactive Armor is Tone's chassis-specific kit. Like all chassis kits, Reactive Armor would reduce the duration of stun effects by half. Additionally, Reactive Armor would cause Tone to emit a pulse whenever she loses a bar of health. Next is the True Seeker kit. This kit makes it so Tone only needs 4 marks to lock instead of 5. However, this kit would also reduce the amount of rockets that Rocket Barrage fires, so while locks are much faster and less predictable, Rocket Barrage deals less damage. Lastly, there's the Brawler kit. This kit allows Titan melees to mark enemy targets and deal increased damage. This would be an excellent defensive kit for all those awkward close-range engagements that Tone can often struggle with. And that pretty much covers it for Tone. I think I fleshed everything out in terms of her weapons, abilities, and kits, and I can't really say that I'm missing anything too crucial. Maybe she could use a third weapon choice if you guys can think of something unique to add. Monarch is widely considered the survival Titan, but I don't actually think that Monarch fills that role as well as she could. Rather, I think that Monarch is more of a support Titan that encourages survivability. Energy Siphon isn't really a traditional defensive ability since it doesn't actually prevent damage from being dealt, it just absorbs it. That may seem like the same thing until you consider that enemy players can still build their Titan and core meter from damaging you. Energy Siphon is also extremely ineffective at blocking damage from pilots, which means if you want to prevent pilots from damaging your Titan, you need to kill them. That would be great if Monarch actually had a way of effectively killing pilots, but she doesn't. Sure, rocket salvo can be great against pilots on the ground, but any decent pilot will attack Titans from the safety of rooftops, and sadly Monarch's XO-16 chain gun is far from reliable at killing them. Rearm is a general use ability which slightly buffs her survivability, but not by much. Having a second energy siphon is great, and refreshing your dashes can help you escape, but I don't feel that these benefits are large enough to make up for Monarch's lack of a reliable defensive ability and an accurate weapon. And while Monarch gains a shield for every core she gets, that doesn't matter too much when you consider that most of the other Titans have a core ability that can destroy you in seconds. For these reasons, I don't think that Monarch is the true queen of survivability. Ion is. Think about it. Ion has easily the best defensive ability in the game without a traditional cooldown. She has an extremely accurate laser to hit pilots on rooftops, a weapon which can be split to hit pilots at close range, a utility which limits enemy movement, and a chassis with a good mix of speed and armor. If I want to survive for as long as possible, I'll take Ion over Monarch every time. But just because Monarch isn't as survivable doesn't mean that I don't like how she functions, since I think that a dedicated support Titan is extremely valuable to have in the game. Which finally brings me to talking about my Monarch redesign, starting with her abilities. I think Energy Siphon is a unique defensive ability, and I would love to see it return with one small change. Damage dealt to Monarch shields don't contribute to enemy Titan or core build meters. For variants, players could choose between Healing Siphon, Chain Siphon, or Double Siphon. Healing Siphon would allow players to give shields to friendly Titans, while Chain Siphon would cause the ability to chain to multiple enemies. This would apply the stun effect to all enemies hit by it, and grant you a small amount of extra shields for every enemy you hit. Lastly, there's Double Siphon, which gives Monarch an additional Energy Siphon charge. Now this might seem overpowered with Rearm, so I should probably explain Monarch's new utility ability. Personally, I'm not too big a fan of the Rearm ability in Titanfall 2. Don't get me wrong, it's very useful and effective, but it doesn't really require too much skill, and it's a fairly uninspired ability in my opinion. To replace it, I think a Support Station ability could add a lot to the game. The Support Station would be a physical object that Monarch could throw onto the ground. Upon activation, the support station would project a large green circle that both teams could see. Friendly Titans that stand in the support station's radius, yourself included, would gain a boost to rate of fire and ability recharge speed. However, since the support station is a physical object on the ground, enemy players could find where it is and destroy it to disable its effects. The support station ability wouldn't start recharging until its duration expires or is destroyed, and support stations wouldn't stack with each other. For variants, players could choose between Support Duration, which makes your support station last longer, Support Strength, which increases support station benefits, or Core Support, which makes you and friendly Titans build their cores faster when in the support station's radius. Lastly, we have Rocket Salvo. I think this is a great offensive ability which synergizes very nicely with Energy Siphon, so I think it should return with no major changes. For variants, players could choose between Rocket Barrage, Laser Guided Missiles, or Accurized Salvo. Rocket Barrage would simply increase the amount of rockets that Rocket Salvo fires. Laser-guided missiles would track where you're aiming like Tone's Salvo Core. This would allow you to hit those pesky pilots on rooftops locking onto you with Archer missiles. Lastly, Accurized Salvo would fire rockets which travel extremely quickly and accurately and would recharge much faster. For Monarch's weapons and attachments, I think that Monarch is the one Titan I'd be fine with only having one weapon. The XO-16 chain gun is such a middle-of-the-road Titan weapon that any other weapon choices would just feel redundant. For weapon attachments, players could choose between Extended Mag, Speed Reload, Stabilizer, and Incendiary rounds. Extended Mag would increase the base magazine from 40 to 50. Speed Reload would do exactly what it says it does, Stabilizer would increase the accuracy, and Incendiary rounds would increase damage dealt to weak points. For reasons I'll discuss in the next video, I took arc rounds away from Monarch. While only having one weapon might take away from customization, Monarch's core upgrades would provide plenty of ways to make your weapons and abilities very unique, which brings me to my next section. Upgrade Core is one of, if not my favorite core ability in Titanfall 2, but while I really like it in concept, I feel it could be a bit better in execution. The problem with Upgrade Core in Titanfall 2 is that there are a few options that feel very underwhelming. Energy Transfer, Energy Field, and multi-target missiles are rarely if ever used. Many of Upgrade Core's options also have been absorbed by weapon attachments or ability variants. However, I've designed all of Monarch's ability variants and weapon attachments in a very specific way that allows them to interact with each other, since stacking variants and attachments is how I've redesigned Upgrade Core. Like Titanfall 2, players could choose between 3 different options for their first 3 cores. Each core tier would have upgrades that improve your weapon, your chassis, or your abilities. At Tier 1, players could choose between Extra Attachment, Lightweight, and Enhanced Support Station. Extra attachment would allow you to equip a second weapon attachment for your XO16 chain gun. Lightweight would reduce your dash cooldown and increase sprint speed. An enhanced support station would allow you to combine a second support station variant with your current one. At tier 2, players could choose between extra attachment again, invulnerable, or enhanced salvo rockets. Extra attachment would allow you to equip a second attachment if you picked lightweight or enhanced support station at tier 1, or a third attachment if you picked extra attachment at tier 1. Invulnerable would remove your Titan's weak point and enhance your countermeasure. Electric smoke would deal more damage, shield boost would last longer, and repair drone would repair faster and heal more health. Enhanced salvo rockets would allow you to combine a second salvo rocket variant with your current one. At tier 3, players could choose between the accelerator, heavy chassis, or enhanced energy siphon. The accelerator would function the same way it does in Titanfall 2, heavy chassis would give you 2 extra bars of Titan armor, and enhanced energy siphon would allow you to combine a second energy siphon variant with your current one. Personally, I think these core upgrades would open the doors for a lot of interesting builds, and give players a lot of control over how they want their Titan to play. I also feel that all the different core upgrades would be useful and enticing for players, rather than some never being used. Lastly, we have Monarch's Titan-specific kits. In Titanfall 2, I think Monarch has some of the best kit selections and some of the worst. Survival of the Fittest and Energy Thief are some of the most interesting and unique kits in the game, but Shield Amplifier and Rapid Rearm are some of the most boring kits in the game. For my redesign, Survival of the Fittest returns, but this time combined with Energy Thief. Survival of the Fittest would allow you to steal a battery with executions and repair your Titan out of the Doom state. However, the 10% core meter gain wouldn't be a part of this kit. Next is the Support Core kit. This kit significantly increases the core meter gains from using Energy Siphon on friendly Titans, buffing allies with Support Station, and getting assists. I also think it would be pretty cool if using Support Core would deploy a turret on top of your Titan that friendly pilots could use. This turret would be great at killing minions and pilots, making it easy for Monarch to get assists, but it would be fairly ineffective against Titans as to remain balanced. The third kit is Augmented Armor. This is Monarch's chassis kit, and once again, like all chassis kits, it reduces the duration of stun effects. Additionally, Augmented Armor increases your core meter gains by 10%. Monarch's last kit is Ability Amplifier. This allows Monarch to select 2 variants by default for one of her abilities. Using this kit, players would be able to combine all 3 variants for one of their abilities if they wanted. And on that note, this concludes my Monarch redesign. Personally, I'm the most happy with this Titan redesign, and I think it provides a lot of synergies and strategies. If you have any of your own ideas for Titan redesigns or completely new Titans altogether, then feel free to leave a comment. Personally, I had an idea for a Titan called Predator, but I could never really flesh out his role or ability set. The only idea I had for him was a utility ability called Hunter Mode that would make your Titan invisible and let you see through walls. But ultimately, he didn't seem unique enough to warrant any more thought, so I gave up on the idea. If any of you guys have any other ideas on how to make this Titan work, then feel free to suggest them down in the comments section. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video, where I'll talk about redesigns for the Strider class Titans.